morning, colleagues. My name is Utem and I will be chairing this morning's session. If you can please settle down. I don't know if my voice is audible enough, but thank you so much. Let me introduce our first presenters, Dr. Yushna Koviji and Mr. Dresden Naidu, who will be presenting on the topic Ubuntu, Incorporating Harmony and Respect for Persons in Undergraduate Medical Education. Dr. Koviji is a medical doctor, bioethicist, and senior lecturer at NMMU Medical School. Her interests include bioethics education, addiction medicine, and reproductive ethics. Mr. Justin is an anatomist and a lecturer at the medical school. He has special interest in medical ethics and efforts towards decolonizing higher education. We have the privilege of time today because I saw that there's 30 minutes of free time. So hopefully I won't be flashing the 2 minutes remaining, the yellow card. But if it comes to that, when you see the yellow card, it's 2 minutes. The red card means that you can stop your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for joining us. Today, Justin and I are speaking about Ubuntu. And the title of our talk is Incorporating Harmony and Respect for Persons in Undergraduate Medical Education. So the background to our talk is, as you've heard, I'm a bioethicist. And just to quickly fill you in case you're unclear about the difference between bioethics, research ethics, medical ethics, clinical ethics. Bioethics encompasses all aspects of ethics related to health and health care, whether it's individual patient-practitioner relationships, whether it is health policy, it's at every level, anything to do with health. Okay, and so we're approaching it from that point of view. And bioethics has been recognized for having predominantly Eurocentric frameworks. It's not surprising when you look at where bioethics came from, right? It arose in the 1940s and really came to a peak. Sort of most of us are familiar with the Belmont Report in 1979. And thereafter, the predominant theory that we use in ethics today, in bioethics today, principlism, which also just arose thereafter. So these are Eurocentric frameworks, and there has been recognition that they don't fully align with Afrocentric moral thinking. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about why when we talk about the literature review. So you heard me say that principlism, it was developed by Beecham and Shores in 1979, following on from the Belmont Report. And they are the dominant theory that is used to analyze moral dilemmas in health and healthcare today. And they themselves say that they are widely accepted because they're based in the common morality. But a lot of African authors, particularly sub-Saharan African authors, have contended that point and talked about what is common morality and how does it differ when you're looking from an Afrocentric worldview. So especially the principle of respect for autonomy, it's not a feature of Afrocentric moral thinking. So there is this misalignment, and this is where Justin and I were talking, that this misalignment, there's a risk that our graduates are going to be insufficiently equipped to deal with African moral dilemmas, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, because collective harmony is prioritized over individual autonomy. And so we are focused on providing culturally sensitive patient care. And if we don't teach Afrocentric moral thinking, then this is going to leave a gap for our students. Okay, so speaking a little bit more about African bioethics then. African bioethics, there's been a call since the early 1990s for this whole concept of African bioethics, and part of it is a response to what they call Western moral imperialism, but a lot of it is this recognition that we need moral frameworks that are acceptable to our African practitioners and healthcare practitioners and students and communities, right? And so there's this, it's been a developing field, but there's recognition of late that there hasn't been a fairly developed moral framework. There's lots of thoughts, there's lots of principles, but what is one framework that we can then hang our hats on? So African principles have been identified, and our question was, how can we incorporate African bioethics principles in undergraduate health education? So I'm going to hand over to Justin to talk a little bit about our aims and objectives.
So when we came up with the research question, it's part of a larger sort of study that we were wanting to do and finding out exactly how these African bioethical principles are eventually going to be applied. So our aim was to explore first, how can we incorporate these African bioethical principles within a South African health professions education. Therefore, our objectives were first to figure out what exactly are the African bioethical principles. We then looked at some of the health, specifically the medical curricula in some of the institutions, to figure out how is it currently being applied, specifically in ethics curricula. And then finally, how do we extend this beyond the formal ethics curriculum? Because we like to talk about hidden agendas a lot. So how now is that going to be in effect? We then, for our methodology, approached it as a mixed method study. To accomplish objective one, finding out what the African bioethical principles are, we undertook a literature review. To then find out how it's currently being applied, we did a document analysis of the 5 South African medical schools with established ethics curricula, specifically the 2025 curricula. And lastly, we then used a narrative review to explore the avenues for incorporating these principles inside the undergraduate medical education, and then spoke a little bit about how it might extend outside.
Thank you. So looking then at objective one, what are African bioethics principles? And what we found is that there's this common understanding amongst the various authors since the 1990s that African bioethics or African morality is underpinned by the concept of Ubuntu. And we really like that. It aligns so well with what we as an institution stand for, and this is something that really just excited us. So we had to look closer to what is this common understanding of Ubuntu as a moral theory. Most of the Southern African bioethicists refer to, at some stage, Desmond Tutu's famous works about Ubuntu, and he talks about Ubuntu as being the essence of being human. He says, my humanity is inextricably bound up in theirs. And that explains Ubuntu very well. So he talks about harmony, friendliness, community goods, with social harmony being the greatest good. And this is something that subsequent authors have worked upon to do. So a number of authors that we came across in the literature review, Wareham 2017, identified 3 central tenets of African moral thinking, and that is relationality, community, and partiality. So if you remember in the beginning, I said that why do we have this differentiation between Afrocentric moral thinking and Western bioethics? And it's really about relationality, because African moral thinking doesn't rely heavily on respectful autonomy. It's rather our relations to each other, and so relational autonomy. So those of you that have had to deal with informed consent may have come across this before. It's not just about the consent from the individual because of relationality. So this contrasts greatly with this whole Western focus on individual well-being and individual autonomy. So partiality, okay, so community, we've spoken a little bit about this whole basis of Ubuntu, and I will speak a little bit more about that, but they tie in with this dependence on each other and this moral obligation to each other to do, what is harmonious for the community. And then partiality is also a very important feature of Afrocentric moral thinking, and that is that unlike certain Western theories, where we must follow the rule regardless of who it is, African moral thinking relies on the fact that we do have special obligations to people that we are close to, whether it's family or friends, whether it is community even, okay? And so we are partial. We give preference to those that form part of our circle, and that must play a feature in our moral decision making. Right, so existing relationships have primacy, and then the next author so what you would realize is that people often refer to African bioethics as a communitarian approach, but we've also realized that it goes beyond a communitarian approach because it's more than just acting for community. And so it's also about shared identity, and Metz talks about an action being right if it is grounded on goodwill, and it's wrong if it fails to encourage goodwill amongst communities, right? So MEDS talks about harmony, and harmony is defined as a shared identity because we belong to the same community, and solidarity. And I think this is also something that subsequent authors have spoken about, that in many sub-Saharan African moral systems, it is expected that you would take care of your sick ones, sick people and your loved ones, even to the extent of giving up your job, for example, because that is what solidarity in community is all about. So apart from MEDS, Behrens also spoke about respect for persons. So if you remember, Belmont report talks about respect for persons. Principalism came along, Beecham and Childress changed it to respect for autonomy. And MEDS proposes that we go back to respect for persons. All right. So recognizing that we are all people, our personhood is not just because we are humans, it's not because of the species. Okay. It is about this idea that we also have a duty to future generations and to the community. And it's not about just ourselves and our individual autonomy. And lastly, it talks about harmony as expressing relationality. So instead of being just about fairness and justice, it's also what would be promoting the greatest contentment amongst communities. So it's about being uniting, affirming, and other respecting. So you can see now how this Afrocentric thinking differs very slightly, but significantly from principalism. And then the last article that really was significant for us is Rakotswane and Van Niekerk, Human Life Invaluableness. So Rakotswane refers to a Sotho principle, a proverb, where he speaks about, let it not go past a beast to kill a human being, when you talk about using a spear. And this for him personifies this whole moral principle that human life comes first, right? You stop at killing an animal, but because that is a human, you don't let that spear go further than the animal. And he says this really links to this principle of human life invaluableness. What they point out very clearly is that Beecham and Childress, when they talk about their 4 principles, they link them to virtues. And each principle gives rise to a virtue, a good action. So, for example, beneficence means you must act benevolently, you must act kindly. But there is no principle in that Western framework that talks about caring and compassion and being loving and putting others first, except for this African principle of human life invaluableness, which is demonstrated through this proverb of let the spear not go past the beast. So those were some of the principles. And then lastly, I came to this article, Behrens, 2013, who then proposes an actual theoretical framework that we can work with. All right. And so Behrens proposes using principalism, but replacing respect for autonomy with respect for persons, and replacing the principle of justice with harmony, because harmony is just a fuller expression of justice. So this is something that we could then hang our hat on.
So then, as part of the document analysis, we had gone on the assumption that since a university would have an established ethics unit, that they would have done a bit more work in terms of trying to Africanize their curriculum. So we looked at the 5 institutions, namely Stellenbosch University, University of Cape Town, University of KwaZulu-Natal, University of Pretoria, and the Witwatersrand University. Looking at their module descriptions of the undergraduate curriculum, specifically the 3 preclinical years. We searched the module descriptions for keywords such as ethics, ethical, and bioethics. It was slightly disappointing to find that none of the module descriptions ever mentioned anything about an Africanized bioethics curriculum. 3 of the 5 institutions did include the words ethics and ethical frameworks in their module descriptions, but it wasn't very broad in terms of looking at a local context. 1 of the 5 institutions doesn't refer to ethics, but just refers to values of a healthcare practitioner. And the 3rd bulletin was, I think, the most disappointing one, because 1 of the 5 institutions did not refer to ethics at all. And the disappointing thing was actually that this curriculum was the latest developed curriculum. in the five institutions that we looked at. There was a lot of emphasis placed on community, and we'll look at that in the table coming forward. And that then ties to the central tenet that Yoshna just mentioned just now about community in the sense of an Africanized bioethics principle. So as you can see, most of the module names from the institutions was dealing with modules teaching the students about becoming a healthcare practitioner, as well as some of the community work that they would then do. You can see there that some speaks about ethics within regards to the community, as I mentioned, but again, not giving us that sort of local context or Africanized ethics that we were looking for.
Thank you. So now we look at the next objective, which is incorporating now what we've learned into going forward into our teaching, right? So we've now decided that we're going to use this framework where we're incorporating harmony to replace principle of justice and respect for persons instead of respect for autonomy in undergraduate medical education. And so objective 1 and 2 address the what, but objective 3 considers the when, the where, and the how. So when. Based on our readings, Behrens has done a lot of work at University of Witwatersrand. We tried to implement this theory, and we looked at his reading, at his publications to see what similarities we could find. And we agreed with some of his findings and disagreed with others. We felt that we should start incorporating it from first year, as we already do that in our teaching, which is quite different from what other medical schools do, who often introduce bioethics in about year 4 or 5. So from first year, we want to create this awareness, and then we want to spiral it through the curriculum, as we currently do. We take ethics each year, we build on it, and we would like to continue doing this, spiraling this African principles in addition to all the Western world theories that are being taught. And we would like very much to continue this into the practice. Yes.
So by looking at all of the principles and looking at the documents, document analysis, we realize that we don't want to just say we want a full shift onto African moral principles, but we want to actually teach it alongside the Western principles that have existed. Our students are not just African scholars, they are also global scholars and need to understand the context of how ethics works. We then also looked at sort of a ripple effect. So within the ethics modules, we'll teach it alongside the Western theories. Outside ethics modules is where we look at science through an Ubuntu lens. And this work, I'm proud to say, has already been in effect at our medical school, as we work with a lot of how African principles are going to be incorporated in the laboratories, and then specifically in terms of my background, anatomy and dealing with cadavers. We then also look at ethics being taught in the context of primary healthcare, the clinical module, and the clinical communication skills, tying again to what Yoshna said about that spiral so that it is consistently reinforced through the years. Outside of the classroom, we looked at community and clinical spaces where we're now engaging with the community in terms of, again, from my background, and in Bizo, where we explain perhaps how we work with the cadavers and how the community then ties into that. And then looking at interprofessional education and collaborative practice. Medical students do not exist in silo. We are in a faculty of health science. From this understanding of our medical students and their engagement with the community, they need to look at the other healthcare practitioners they work with and sort of filter down that Africanized bioethics.
Okay, looking at how continued we so that we actually need to include conversations around these two principles, respect for persons and harmony, and incorporate students' indigenous knowledge, because I do find that students struggle with this concept of respect for autonomy. It's not what they grew up with, it's not what is acceptable to them, in the community. And this is something that we can offer as an alternative and have discussions. We could incorporate it in case studies. So we currently teach ethics with the use of case studies, but also outside of the ethics modules, when we talk about case studies, we can incorporate conversations around these two principles specifically. And something that I really hope to achieve in my career here at Mandela University is bedside ethics teaching. I think that is an excellent opportunity to get to the student to find cases in the wards and teach bedside, in the wards. And incorporate these sort of principles, because I'm convinced that they are facing these issues of relationality and community. Okay, Jasper.
So part of that would then be having discussions with our students, and again, looking at the interprofessional education space in terms of informed consent and specifically relational autonomy about respect for persons and understanding that a person is part of a larger community and plays a role in that community. So therefore, when they are giving consent or when they are speaking about something, they don't just represent themselves, but they represent a larger group of people and then community. And then moving that into debates regarding the health and healthcare system and looking at how the Ubuntu principles such as harmony and respect for persons can then be tied into that. And so thinking bigger, from what we did, and I think one of the limitations that I'm going to bring forward in terms of the document analysis is, yes, we looked at what is on paper, but that does not always translate to how the educators in those modules are discussing ethics in the classroom. So yes, it may have looked that there isn't sort of an Africanized bioethics being translated across to students, but we need to then find out on a larger national scale, how is that occurring? That involves creating an expert group to create a consensus framework on Africanized bioethical principles. And then the implementation of that, we were slightly ambitious in our discussions, similar to how all healthcare professionals are registered to a professional body. We were hoping that eventually we could have some sort of standardized competency course where undergraduate students are then taught these Africanized bioethical principles and also realize how to apply them so that we then establish a national stance and a national standard.
Okay, so in conclusion then, Africanized principles of respect for persons and harmony better align with this African moral concept of Ubuntu, and these should replace, we agree with parents, they should replace principles of respect for autonomy and justice, and it better equips graduates for the ethical dilemmas that they are more likely to encounter in the Southern African context. The curriculum gap that we identified can be met by consciously highlighting and integrating African bioethics into medical school syllabi from the preclinical years and beyond medical ethics. And lastly, the incorporation of Ubuntu principles in health professions education outside of undergraduate medical education will allow for a shared interprofessional approach to resolving ethical dilemmas in our context. And there are references. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yushna and Joycelyn, for that interesting presentation. I have to say that I feel heard from the presentation, and maybe now I can do bioethics as well. Especially reflecting on the concept of relationality. Just from my personal experience now on the research side, I know this is L&T, but on the research side, when I was writing my PhD, that is the one concept that I was grappling with. And I put it through on my ethics section section of the thesis, and I really went in on it, very personal, because when I went and collected data, whatever that I've been prepared for in terms of the content on ethics that I was reading or that I was taught was not speaking to what was happening. And I had to look for the concept that actually speaks to that. And I found relationality as a concept. So when you were presenting that, I was just like, yes, I'm on the right track with the, understanding ethics or bioethics, but from an African moral point of view or from an African framework. And dealing with concepts that I can actually understand. And when you go into the community, this is something that the community can understand. So thank you so much for that. I'm gonna open up the questions for the floor to engage with the presenters. We do have very nice on time, so maybe 5 minutes. Any comments or questions from the floor? Just engagement, yes, Prof.
Thank you for doing groundbreaking work. I'm curious about looking at the curricula of other institutions. Was it information in the public domain? How did you go about making sure that you sampled everywhere where it might have been in the curriculum?
So we had a discussion first about which institutions already have an established ethics unit. And then all curricula is available on the university website. So if you just scroll through the syllabi, you then have access to the document. So it is available in the public domain. And then we just did a sifting exercise looking first at the preclinical years, because some were a bit tricky. They pushed over into the 4th year, not just the 3rd year. And then looking at again preclinical and then sorting it down in terms of where those keywords were then going to be as well.
If I can just add to that, we did also have a discussion about possibly the next step should be using Loop.
Yeah.
But finding out how to access Loop, because that would be, that you could actually then get the actual curricula. Perhaps they're not putting it in their module
Yeah.
script.
Correct.
Yeah, because what is publicly available is probably quite a high level thing. Whereas,
Yeah, but because the module should describe exactly the content of that, I mean, that's how I think the background in module development allowed us to understand what should be there. That's why we went that route first. But again, as I said, it's a limitation because we need to engage with the actual lecturers who are in those modules, because it might not be in black and white. But as Yushna said, Loop was our next thing, next thought process because of learning outcomes and learning objectives. But that will then involve us having discussions with those lecturers in order to have access to those documents.
which would need to go through that university's research
Correct.
ethics committee. I've been on the receiving end of receiving inquiries from researchers from other universities wanting to look at our curriculum.
Yeah.
And then there is a formal process through the ethics committee. Whereas if you look at publicly available information.
Yes. So I've done some document analysis in the past, so I was quite familiar with the ethics processes.
Thank you so much. I think I will the hand here. I will take you and then Dr. Reno afterwards.
Okay, mine is with in regard to formulating in the early stage of data collection. In the way of when we do ethics, I'm assuming that in the undergraduate proceeding to the qualifications, are we limited to formal? When I say formal, I will be saying institutionalized areas where we do data collection, or is it going to be open as wide as to say that, knowing that in the African content and the stats reveal that most of our second opinion is with traditional healers and so forth, and outside the main scope of the health professional. Do we then in the formulation of the curriculum, is there a plan to try to incorporate the traditional? When I say traditional, it will be more Afrocentric, incorporating it with the westernized or colonized, with the westernized formulation to say that in this way, when we want to deliver the curriculum as the facilitators, at what meeting point? Because I'm assuming with the formalized, there's total quality management thing. Then as from traditional, it's more like with the field.
100%. I think something that we must always be careful of is while trying to decolonize the curriculum, we end up colonizing it. And therefore, when we said about thinking bigger and creating this expert group of people, it can't just be academics. It needs to be people on the ground in those communities. Because if we're looking at community values, we need representatives from the community. So definitely.
Yeah, I think to add to that also, this is one of the reasons why we like Barron's theory so much, that he is proposing an actual framework that is workable. That we have to use Belmont currently, and I think it's going to change, I think, in the near future when you're talking research ethics. You have to use Belmont principles when you're doing informed consent. But the implications of using a framework like this, where you can acknowledge, as you said, relationality, it's going to bring a whole different dimension to your informed consent process.
I could be interested in this discourse about the current imbalance between African voices and international voices and actually writing about African bioethics. Whether you came across the authors who published who are either based in Africa or of African nationality. It's a major public area of debate. And then the other discourse that I wanted to raise is the extent to which we in-house at Mandela Uni involve the Faculty of Humanities and other faculties in order to frame and develop the conversation agreement, and then look at case studies that are applicable that can be used in the kind of bioethics.
I think so. What you said first speaks to what I said about trying to decolonize and not colonizing, because most cases you've got people from outside telling us what should happen here, and therefore I think from the articles that we looked at, we were trying to be specific about people from here telling us what the needs are, and I think that's a great idea in terms of this becoming a bigger project and fostering that interprofessional collaboration.
Yeah, I think, with the literature review and the discussion actually has started with African countries because, again, there was this recognition that these theories are not meeting African needs. So most of the authors in the beginning were not from Southern Africa per se, but the ones that we focused on were parents. They are and Endo and kind of Southern African, and actually, in fact, focus very much on South African as well. So that was the first question. The second one was engaging with colleagues in the humanities, and I was just interested, and I was very excited because I read in the staff news that there is somebody appointed now recently at the Department of Philosophy who is working very much on African bioethics, and his focus is on personhood. So that's going to be obviously something that interdisciplinary collaboration.
Any other input? Yes, please.
I like what you said about how ambitious it is that you wanted a national standardized framework for everybody. But I think that is very ambitious. It's just a lot of information. How then do you apply some of this within the region that we're in? Which groups do you talk to? How do you go about it? How do you go about consulting them and incorporating their ideals, their opinions into the work that you're doing, and then further having, the rest of faculties following suit? Yeah, that was my question.
So that is a great question because I do not have the answer. I think specifically someone that's even outside the metro, I come from a very brown place called Chatsworth. So I myself am not fully aware of all of the groups of people within there. So we have lovely community platform coordinators in our faculty, and I think the conversations need to start there because they possibly would introduce us to the people in the community that can then move forward. Word of mouth might be the easiest in terms of trying to get a reach out to people, but I'm not exactly, as I said, sure how we're going to do it. Ambitious. It's going to take a lot of thinking and planning with a lot.
And just to add to that also, that we haven't proposed creating an entirely new theoretical framework. We're taking appearances from where the groundwork has already been done to say what are the underlying principles, and we start proposing a theory. And so now we're looking at how can we implement, and I think that's starting really much smaller, particularly within the faculty. This is an excellent opportunity for IP. It lends itself so well.
Thank you so much, colleagues. On both of the questions right now, you are more than welcome to engage with Yushna and Justin afterwards. But from our side, thank you so much for your engaging presentations. And we are looking forward to seeing what, that next step. Thank you so much.
Yes, fine.
Can I invite our next presenters? It's your Thank you so much. Dr. Yushna, I'm not gonna introduce you again. I've already introduced to the congregation. So it is my pleasure to introduce the other presenters that you are with. Dr. Mia van Steven, who is a pharmacist and senior lecturer in the clinical pharmacology at the medical school. And she's currently involved in the collaborative development of the Mission Bell Medicinal Garden as a resource for learning and teaching, research, and community engagement. Her interests include social accountability in healthcare education. And with them is also Mr. Tabo Simpe, who is a professional nurse and a lecturer in primary health at the medical school. His interest is in public health and indigenous knowledge systems, which includes fostering relationships with traditional health practitioners, so you'll be happy about that. And from all cultural groups as stakeholders in our health systems, where there is a definite need to be as inclusive as possible. Thank you so much. You do have 30 minutes according to the program, but because of the privilege of time, I will look away if you go, 5 minutes extra.
Thank you very much. Okay, so again, colleagues, I'm going to take off my ethicist hat now and put on my learning and teaching hat, and we just wanted to share with you an experience that we had this learning activity called Medicine, Culture and Religion and a Medicinal Garden Plant Hunt, which was so exciting for us as educators that we really just had to share it with everybody else. All right, so the outline of our talk for today is we're going to look at the background of the module in which this learning activity occurred and the medicinal garden at Mission Vale campus in which the learning activity took place. We will describe the activity itself, provide you with some lesson evaluation in the form of student feedback and educator reflections, and then conclusions with the recommendations and future planning. All right, so background to the module. So I coordinate this module called Theory and Practice of Medicine. It's a first and second year module. And in first year, YTHP 100, we have 100 students. It's a module that's best described as an umbrella module with 40 credits. And it encompasses a number of things, including theoretical domains about becoming a professional, becoming a doctor, primary healthcare, and so forth. But it also includes a community-based practice component where students go out and engage with members of the community, even though they're not treating them as patients yet, and they learn clinical communication skills, including languages. So within this module, in the first theme, which is called Becoming a Doctor, they encounter lots of theoretical concepts around life stage and lifespan development, and lots about culture and cultural competence. So there is this topic called Medicine, Culture and Religion. And the learning outcomes for this topic include exploring the cultural influences on health and healing in South Africa, and learning about complementary and alternative medicine systems, specifically traditional African medicine, that students are likely to encounter in their future engagements with patients. So this lecture incorporates discussion on students' experiences, where they share the experiences of complementary and alternative healthcare systems that they have used and their own traditional and cultural and religious beliefs and how that influences their healthcare. But we did feel that there was a gap and that there was room for something experiential in this lecture. And also what happened was that during the community-based practice component of the module, the students go out and they meet families and they begin really basic practice of communication skills and really basic history taking. And we were realizing that families were very excited to share with the students how they access their healthcare, and we'd often show the students their gardens. We go to clinics around the Mission Vale campus, and most of the homes that they visit, people grow their own plants and herbs, and they'll say to the students, we use this one when we have a cough, and you use this one for that, So students are being exposed to this already, and so there was this gap that we needed to fill. And so we introduced a practical component. Once I heard about Mia and what she does, I was so excited, and I reached out to her, and she came up with this wonderful idea, which she's going to share with you, the practical component in the form of a plant hunt in the medicinal garden. There we go. Okay.
Sorry. So I'll just give you some background. Why is there a medicinal garden at Mission Vale? How did it end up there? So this in the year 2000, when it was still called UPE and the Technicon, there was a bunch of traditional healthcare practitioners that approached the university, and Professor Smith was one of the original people that the unions engaged with. And so basically we were testing plants, and one of the ideas that came out of collaboration that was we needed to start a medicinal garden. So the collaboration went on, and the garden at Mission Vale was the second garden that we did. And it was launched, I think, in 2014, if I'm not wrong, because I wasn't there anymore. So I wasn't there. I was there from 2000 to 2007, and then someone in Bali, Vunukele from pharmacy, took over the project. And then it was launched in 2014. And after Mbali went away, it was like hanging at Mission Vale campus. So phase one was complete, and then there wasn't really anything going on after that. So horticulture was looking after it, but there was a drought, and then there was COVID, and so the garden was basically hanging there. And then in 2022, there were a lot of people starting to ask about the garden. What's going on with the garden? Is it still working? So it came from within the Department of Health. It came from within the university. And then the healers that we initially worked with also were asking about, how is this going to go forward now? So we are in the process of picking up the collaboration and developing the medicinal garden a little bit more and reinvigorating it. And so the primary aim of this garden is to be a physical resource for all of the pillars of the university, teaching and learning, and we're trying to get everyone together. So when Joshua came to me and said, let's do something in the garden, I was like, yes, let's do something in the garden. And that is how we got together.
Okay. Oh, then it's just, oh yeah, the activity itself.
Yes.
Do you perhaps want to talk about that?
Yes,
please.
Okay.
Oh, shall I? Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay, so the medicinal garden plant hunt, right? So what we did was after the lecture, we randomly divided the students. There's 100 students, so we divided them into groups of, basically told them to divide themselves into groups of 10, just based on where they're sitting. And they were provided with the Latin names of 2 plants, carefully pre-selected by Mia. And then in the classroom, they were literally just given a Latin name, and they were told to do a desktop search, Google it, find each plant's photo, so they needed to know what it looks like, and then what are the indigenous names, and as many as they could find for those Latin names, and traditional uses. And we also then encouraged them to share their own stories if they were familiar with what those plants were. And then off they went after that pre-allocated time. We went off to the garden, everybody met there, and then it was a treasure hunt. They were given a time limit, they had to race to find the plant. Hopefully they've gotten good pictures to find the plant, because they don't really have very big labels on them. And then stand by the plant, and then there were 2 groups presenting each plant, so they were competing with each other to see who could impress the lecturers more with their knowledge, present to each other, and and so that was the medicinal garden plant hunt. Okay, so Thabo is going to give us some feedback in terms of how the students experienced it.
Morning, colleague. Was it still morning? Okay.
Fortunately.
In terms of student feedback, wow, the students were very excited. When they arrived at the medicine garden, when we explained what they needed to do, they got on with it. They were chasing, literally going from one, tree to another to identify the plant, finding out, first searching via Google what is the indication for that plant, and then some of them interestingly spoke from their experience from their own life world. So it was interesting to watch them sharing And some of the what I also observed when I was listening to them, they will talk about a plant and they will say even the indication that's not mentioned when they were googling for the information. For instance, I will just share some of the responses. One student said, "My mind felt very open because I was used to westernized medication. Only and I did not know that there was more than one option to treatment plans rather than medicine." The one student also, the other student was saying what was good was that it reminded me of who I am. Comes back to the issue of um, Ubuntu and what I believe in as I seem to forget and sometimes afraid to share my knowledge about culture as people mistake use of herbs as being practicing witchcraft. Right? Very interesting. Then the last. There were too many. We just extracted just a few. Also for the sake of time. The one student also said, "I was paired with some of my classmates that I've never spoken to, so that we can get to know each other." So that presented an opportunity for them to share with each other about their own culture, and they're also incorporating the use of traditional medicine. And the students goes on to say that the experience was an opportunity to learn about medication, but also about my classmate, and it was a hands-on activity, basically something away from the books, away from the book, because we spend most times in books and study. So it was some kind of a recreation for them in a way while they were learning. And then just to go on with it, the one student was saying it enticed me, making me to want to find out more. So the interest was stimulated more in terms of these different plants. I'm thinking of researching about any new plants I see and find out their names and what they are used for. And the one interesting comment was the one student said it made me appreciate nature and culture more. I'm going to advocate for listen to this conservation of nature and plants, and they can be useful in one way or another. I will visit more gardens for more knowledge. So I'm not going to read all of them because it's actually pinpointing or highlighting the fact that the experience of them visiting the medicine garden was indeed for them a learning opportunity and something that stimulated them to learn more, and also it made them appreciate their background, their cultural background. Because I remember one student was sharing that they identify this one plant that they are using in their own culture. They're using it to ward off evil spirits. Although it is known as this kind of plant, but they are also using it for other reasons. And then the last comment, I will caution others against destroying nature, especially in the villages where medicinal trees are in abundance, but they are not aware of their capabilities. So this is stirred also an interest in the student to also spread the messages of conservation in a way. Preserving what nature has provided for us, so that we can use to identify those plants with healing properties, let people know about them, and also to preserve them. Thank you.
Okay, and then moving on to the educator reflections, we'll let Mary begin.
So for me, I really didn't know what to expect from the students. So I was a little bit concerned that it was going to fall flat, but it didn't. And I was amazed at how much personal experience many of the students had, like stuff like it grows at my grandmother's house. My dad uses it when he's got headaches, like personal experiences. They could even say, when some students ask, so how do you put it in your ear? Then they could explain how you actually made it up in mud. You mustn't put too much of it in. So there was such a lot of personal experience, which I didn't I did, but I also didn't expect the richness of it. And then the other aspect was for me the sensory learning experience. There was a student that spoke about this activity was good in the sense that you learn through physical experiences and not just seeing plants on a PowerPoint presentation, touching the leaf, feeling the textures, smelling the plants. There's something about sensory learning that is just different from classroom learning. So I really enjoyed that.
Thanks, Mia. From my side, I was just impressed how seriously students took this exercise. I thought, they're going to take it as a chance to just be out there and just walk around the garden. They were competitive. I mean, we know medical students are competitive, but they were trying to outdo each other with the knowledge. And they really just wanted to demonstrate how much they know and to share their stories exactly as Mia has said. They took great delight in teaching me things that I didn't know. And I did say to them at the outset, so Tabo and Mia would be judging, the responses because they both have expertise in that, but I'm coming as a novice and I've not heard of some of these plants. They loved the fact that they were teaching me something and we were co-creating knowledge. It was just so special.
Yes, it was interesting to note that some of the students were saying, now I know when I'm doing history taking to be mindful of the patient's experience. So, because they are taught in a biomedical world. So now when they're doing history taking, they're going to be mindful that because the issue is around double consultation. The patient will come to a doctor, but they already have spoken to, or they already, maybe they have been to a traditional practitioner, and the traditional practitioner said, go to the doctor first. Western doctor, I know from experience, and then come back to me and hear what the doctor says. So it was interesting in that sense that you watch them saying that they will keep that in mind during history taking. Other than the fact that all the other issues have already been mentioned about them, we're being very, very excited, willing to share knowledge, and also, as Dr. Tony said earlier, you become a perpetual learner. As the students, because some of the students are coming in from far-flung rural areas where many of these trees are. So then they reminded you about some of the uses of some of the trees. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So to conclude, we want to just share some of our recommendations and our future planning. We did take, it wasn't a perfect exercise. There is room for growth there. So in terms of practical and operational aspects, I realize we definitely do need more facilitators. Between the three of us, all three of us had to stand with one student group, bearing in mind that the others are now waiting. So you can only see 20 students at a time. We do need more facilitators so that the students don't have such a long wait. Waiting to present. And then we also thought of the idea of having more interactive aspects. So those that are waiting, what else can they do in the meantime? Maybe have some other things for them to hunt up in the garden. So that was what I thought of in terms of practical and operational aspects. And then Mia had some thoughts on IPE.
Yeah, so I think you might have noticed we are an IPE team. So we enjoyed it. I think IPE students, a mix of students could also enjoy it. So I think this will be quite easy if we can just get all the students there to make it an interprofessional learning activity. We can maybe adapt it to include more specifically dietetics, where we're talking as food as medicine as well. The environmental aspects that Tabo was lifting out from the students things is a big thing. This whole concept of planetary health and how we can really dig into that. And then also the mental health aspect of the garden is something that still needs to be explored, because it's really nice to go there and see the things. Yeah.
And then Tabo will share with us some recommendations in future planning regarding community engagement.
We thought that as part of extended knowledge about the medicine garden, we could involve more traditional practitioners, not only from the African culture. The San and Khoi, we could also involve them. Because in my previous engagement with Mia, we called mostly that they were African Xhosa speaking. traditional practitioners. So we need to just to get more involved, especially around this area where we are. And that also we will, we're also planning that the students can also experience them. We get them in around in the garden at some stage, and the students will be there with them, exploring more about their knowledge about the plants. So there will be that sharing of knowledge between the students as well as traditional practitioners.
Okay, thank you. So in conclusion, this experience not only introduced students to traditional medicinal knowledge, but also provided a space for them to share and value cultural heritage within medical education. It reinforced the importance of integrating traditional healing knowledge into the training of future healthcare professionals. And so that gives us some.
Wow.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think for me, what it highlights is that beyond talking about indigenous knowledge systems in terms of the curriculum as well as the content that we teach our students, the practical implementation of that is important, and this is reflected, via the hunt. I'm just curious whether there was any, work injury at school place things that were reported. But we can
warned them. I warned them to be careful because a lot of thorns.
Yes.
I don't think anybody was injured.
No,
I-
although
Curious.
bring the sun hats. So we said
Yes.
next time in the learning activity, we need to warn them to bring sun hats and sun.
That is one of those side thoughts that should have not came. But I will open up the floor for a round of questions. Yes, Dr. Tony.
It's not necessarily a question. I had a question, but Tabo responded to my question because I was thinking about what you call IPE, integrating and hearing the voices of traditional healers. So you responded to that question. I have just one comment. You transported me back to my childhood. I was listening with interest. You reminded me of my grandmother who never went to school. And I grew up in Mossel Bay. And those who know the area, there's a lot of Afrikaans. And my grandmother had, it was not a garden, some few plants. And I knew that when I had flu, I was going to have umhlonyana, boil it. And when I was now wondering, as you were talking, I'm thinking, my grandmother was not saying it right. Because when I had stomach cramps, my grandmother would say, "Grunamara."
Yeah.
So I'm keep on thinking, what was that? And again, when you was talking about drops in the ear, my grandmother would be talking about knuffle and all of that and use a handkerchief. So I'm very excited and I'm looking forward to the integration of all these knowledge systems. Thank you for reminding me of where I come from.
Yeah, there was a big discussion about umhlonyane, and so many students were telling personal stuff. So we stood at the umhlonyane plant for a while.
For me, I think as the university taking an opportunity that we are a nature reserve. And we also have we have, I think, 3 or 2 specific degrees that can maybe collab. We have the nautical, the horticulture, and the guys that deal with plant botany students. And also zoology does also do that. Then you come with the EMC students where we do a whole wilderness course where we camp at adults. Then as to me, as I was also in the hiking, I was just also educating the guys as we're walking about. Maybe in a future event, because we do have a nature reserve, maybe not now or later, where we could bring some students to say that maybe a special assignment from the plant, from the seed to the actual treatment to the patient, tertiary care, to do something like that.
Yeah, and I've been speaking to botany. And they are actually quite excited to bring their students to do a project where they will identify all the plants in the garden.
Yes.
Because we are not botanists, so we're
Yes,
like,
yes.
oh, I know some of it, but not all of it. So that's in the pipeline.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Just to add to that, mentioning the sun and the koi, to maybe also speak to architecture because they've got a big project. What's the name again? I'm not good with names. Minguzi. Where's Dr. Tony?
Yeah.
What's that prof? Is it Minguzi that in architecture that works a lot with the koi song?
Oh, I remember. I forgot her name. She's thinking about building huts and
Yes,
stuff.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So that we maybe get them involved as well to add those plants because they always a marginalized
Yes.
community that's actually part of our province, and we don't include them always to add that to the garden.
So much. Yes, please.
This is just to add on to what the gentleman was saying about exploring the nature reserve in general. I think I'm not sure if any of you usually go to South Campus, but there's a bunch of flowers there.
Yeah.
In front of building 123, there's lavender, and lavender is great for aromatherapy. There are different types of aloe plants, of succulents all over. The African daisy, which is indigenous to this region of the country, is right in front of the HMS building. And people don't realize simple facts like this. So recently, there have been signs that have been put up in front of just like a bunch of the plants, but they're rubbing off now. And also, there isn't the Xhosa name for it. So you see it happening all over monuments in the city. There's names for it and the Xhosa name for it, and then the indication. And I think it's beautiful that there is a garden for all of this. I think it's also beautiful that we can extend the knowledge to our campuses. So even the layman can understand that they're walking on a campus that is rich in resources and also rich in nutrients that can actually help them.
Thank you so much. I think you've got a collaborator there. I will take the last question and then we'll move on to the next presentation.
Thank you. It's not really a question for me, more of a comment. Thanks for the presentation. I think it's a bit sad that we're at Missionville and we didn't even know of something like this. And my comment is mainly to keep my department in mind when you start the IPE, because I think it would be really beneficial as a paramedic who goes to people's houses, who would be the actual person to see the plants and maybe knowing some of the indications, the side effects, compared to the doctor where the patient goes to your hospital or clinic but doesn't bring along the plants. So I think it would be of such benefit to our students and to have some of this knowledge. So I'm just planting the seed to just water we'll meet at the kitchen. Don't forget.
Good one.
No, it's something that we inculcate in the students that when they open up with the patient about when they allow the patient to tell them what have they been using and without being judgmental or showing any bias, then the patient will open up. And however, we need also to put in a word of caution in terms of because sometimes the doctor will not know what may be the contraindication of this medication. So when you are giving certain prescribing medication and giving medication, you need to inform the patient that I'm not aware of the contraindication of the plants that you are using to the medication that I'm giving you.
Yeah.
So that open communication will definitely improve the treatment plan for the patient.
Thank you so much. Oh, just sorry, my apologies for a second. We had Buddhist from the Learning and Teaching Directorate. Just to thank you so much for your presentation and for the engagement. Dr. Yushna, they say
Thank you.
only once. Now we're going to move on to our next presentation by Dr. Rian van der Venter from the Department of Radiography. Dr. Rian facilitates learning and teaching of undergraduate radiography students using predominantly a blend of constructivist, transformative, and cognitivist pedagogies. Their educational interests are AI for academic purposes, technology enhanced pedagogy and curriculum design. And because I'm a biased member of the research directorate, I'm also an NRF rated researcher.
Let's see if I know how to work it. So I'm going to share a possible solution to a problem that we all most probably have, and that problem is maybe that we are moaning that students don't engage with us. They just sit there, but don't go do the homework at home. Possibly they don't want to interact with one another. They just use it as free time in the classroom, talking about everything except what they are supposed to be talking about. But then we also always complain that they don't have critical thinking skills, they can't solve problems, they just want to use the information, regurgitate it, and can't apply the theory. But we also most probably complain that they are not reflective enough. So if you give them those reflective tasks, it's like, yeah, I'll do it overnight, and that's it. And possibly it leaves us like this, wanting to pull our hair out and thinking, so what do we do? And I started to experiment with this living library method or strategy, but not in the way it was designed. So just to give you a little bit of background, when we think of a library, that's what we think of, not a place where our students go to. Some of them, I always tell mine that they don't even know the smell of a library. And I asked them where our books are for radiography, and they can't even tell me that it's at North Campus. Because some of them have never been there. But a living library becomes something like this, where the books becomes people. So it's a Danish concept from the 2000s, and it's supposed to be a very structured event where you invite people with lived experiences on particular things. But the main goal was to discuss things around prejudice and discrimination, to teach them about cultural humility. But I use it a little bit differently, and the key component is the students have to talk. They can't just sit there because there's no other books. They're not allowed to take a piece of paper or a book out of their bags. They need to sit like many of us here. So there's nothing else to go with. It has to come from the head or the heart. So here the books are the people with lived experiences, and the readers are those that actually engage with the books, asking them questions, telling them similar stories and how they can relate to it. And the methodology of how the Danish people have structured it, I've repurposed it for my intent, because one day I was like, after the test, I saw they struggled a little bit. After they had a role play on communication and professionalism, they still couldn't transfer all of those skills to the test. And I'm busy marking it, and it showed. Which made me feel really bad about myself. So I was like, so how do we revise work where I can maybe see students engage with the work a little bit better without them feeling threatened because of the test? And then maybe they have different skills for the workplace. So how did I do this? I know I'm very privileged because that's a very big class for me, 36 students. Not the biggest we have, but 36 is a lot for a radiographer. We used to classes of about 20. My smallest class is 14. That's the fourth year module. It's in my professional practice module, which we deal with professionalism, but also ethics and health law all in one go. It's a year module. And we tried to revise the first 3 learning units that we've done, which was ethical reasoning, and the application of all the ethical principles, communication, but also then aspects of professionalism. So that's what we dealt with. So what I wanted to do was to see if we can revise theory in a non-threatening way where people feel free to share their experiences, to develop that critical thinking skills that we would like our students to have, to transfer them that theoretical knowledge to the clinical environment, and then to address their issue of what you are teaching me in the class is not relevant when I go to the clinical environment. So how do I get them to see what I teach you is relevant for that theory practice integration? So yeah, in my repurposed version of the methodology, the students and I both became books and readers at the same time. So they could ask me questions about things they were wondering about, or one person becomes a book and it becomes story time for everyone, and you then engage with that particular book to allow them to share what they would like to. But if they would not like to talk about the particular thing, they don't have to. And then other students could then say, I relate to this. I did it this way. I was taught this way by another staff member. And then how they've learned different things. So the first thing was, the prompt was, tell us about the experience in the clinical environment. And they had to link it to the 3 units that we've done. And then they had to tell us what happened, how they felt about it, how did they deal with it, and what are they still left wondering about. And that's then where the advice comes from the others. But the advice had to be grounded in what we've covered in the learning units. You couldn't just come up with anything. But it could also be linked with something they've learned or picked up in the clinical environment from staff and tricks of the trade. So what students then have to say about this? Because we always come with good intent. Always maybe used loosely, but they don't always see it the same way as us. We can be very excited, but they don't sit there and like, what a waste. So, but this one wasn't a waste. So I gave them a Google Forms anonymous survey. I asked ChatGPT to help me come up with some questions. And some of them are repurposed from that because I was wondering, so what kind of questions would I ask of them? But I had to link it to what the goal was of the lesson. So they found it quite meaningful by the ratings that you can see on the far side. Also helped them to think deeply about certain things, but also challenge their own assumptions about it. It also helped them to feel empowered and not alone, because many a times you experience something, you think it's a me problem, but they see their friends are also experiencing it in other clinical spaces. Then possibly the last 2 was about memorable clinical scenarios, because there's always that one scenario that you remember or 2. And yeah, I use them as the case studies in the class because they stuck in your head. And the students already have those kind of things, which is quite impressive at a 2nd year level out of a 4-year program. So looking at those ratings, we can see that quite a positive impact. So the experiment kind of worked. Possibly this one, the Living Library, challenged my own assumptions. We didn't necessarily focus on that too much, but maybe that's something I need to incorporate into it. And that's why that rating could possibly be lower. And then only 13 out of 36 students responded to the evaluation because they were on the clinical platform, so that may have influenced that. To give some qualitative views to this, so some found it useful to reflect on situations that were quite similar to what a particular person experienced, but they also see that how closely knit it is to the theory they covered. So now they're seeing the theory coming alive and real. And they have been using the theory without them necessarily knowing it. Another student said that it actually helped them to have renewed or new perspectives about a particular thing, but also then seeing that they're not alone and revisiting these things that they've seen through the eyes of their fellow classmates helps them to analyze these situations a bit better, because now they seem like they haven't thought of it in that way and they can now look at it differently. Another student, in terms of the challenge, your own assumptions, was that through the face-to-face conversations, It allowed them to feel free to ask those questions that they always wanted to ask, but didn't know where and how. But because everybody's asking questions,
Yeah.
they are into it as well, because we know students don't like to ask questions because they feel like it's stupid or maybe they're the only one. So the rule in my class is if you have a question, 10 others have the same. So please ask it because they feel exactly the same as you. They just want someone else to ask that question. And then also that it helps with their growth as a student. And then the last comment linked to the preparedness is that they can now see that although it looks very complex, very difficult to them, and they feel like it's the world against them, that they have the tools to actually overcome that particular thing, and that they just have to ask particular questions and they can still draw on the theory. They don't have to see it as a waste for them in that, because that's the socialization process. The bad part of clinical placement, that hidden curriculum where, no, you don't have to do this. Don't worry about them. They teach because they can't do. We had to do before we teach. So, and yeah, I always go back to the first student when I started here, when I went to the clinical platform and said to me, no, you can't do a lateral chest while the patient is sitting on the chair. I was like, bring me the chair. No, I can't. I'm like, bring me the chair. So the student did. And I did it, and I was praying, let this just be like a textbook picture. I haven't touched the patient in a long time. And it worked. And the student's like, oh, wow, so it does work. So, because I don't necessarily give clinical subjects, I do think we weren't radiographers because the modules I tend to do is more social science stuff. So yeah, we have those, but they can now see. We don't just talk. So in conclusion, I think I may have convinced you that the goals that I wanted to achieve were achieved, maybe partially, because I haven't necessarily investigated whether they can apply theory into practice. But I've been in the hospitals earlier this week, and some of them can actually. They just need to believe in themselves because they tend to become a bit unsure because it's you, so I must act this way. It's you, I have to perform in this way. But in terms of critical thinking and reflection, we could see possibly from how they've rated those questions that that is there, and that we could revise theory using this particular approach without having books in front of us, because they need to believe that they have it in their heads. We can get them to engage with us and not just sit there and we get frustrated. And then maybe a surprising thing from the comments that the students have shown is a sense of development of cultural competence and humility using this methodology, but also their interpersonal skills, which I didn't necessarily was the goal, but that was there. And that's my story.
Thank you so much, Rian. I think very innovative methods that I've been hearing about today. And you know, I before I didn't know what a living library is, but now that you've explained it, it took me back to you know when I was young and my grandmother's was telling us the stories, and we were listening and asking the questions with the cousins because we're so curious to learn you know what she's talking about. So I can definitely relate a living library, like, oh, it's my grandmother. She's sharing knowledge, and I need to ask as much questions I can so that I can learn and retain that knowledge. So thank you so much. I'm gonna open up for the floor. We have until 1 o'clock to engage comments and questions, or maybe we can break earlier and then use the pause room. For some of us, yes, please. Thank you.
So I have a question, and I'm just because my frame of reference is medical students, and you know, as I've said before, they're quite competitive, and I do find sometimes it takes some time to break the ice because they're shy to speak in front of others and say the wrong thing. So did you have that experience? Was there in the beginning sort of some kind of reticence, or that they don't want others to look on them and say, oh no, that's not actually what it is?
Yeah, it happens in radiography too. I do think some of them are silently competitive, but they weren't necessarily show it. So I had to get ground rules from the start. Be open. We all had some form of experience, and whoever would like to start. We didn't say you must start because that would put them off completely. It had to be psychologically safe in that environment. But we do have quite a few talkers in the class, and once they have talked, everybody will talk. It's almost like a domino, it just happens. And I think in a smaller class, it's going to work better than a bigger class. So maybe in medicine, you would have to have those 10 or 20, in a group, or even 40. Which you don't want to be there the whole day. Because in the original method, reading the book was only allowed for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I didn't have any time limit. And the book can also decide to cut off the conversation whenever they feel like it, especially if that person became a threat to them, asking inappropriate questions. So that's from the original method, but I didn't put those rules into it because that also then makes it a bit more stiff. But if you're going to have patients coming from the outside, maybe you have to have those particular rules. And then the big thing was we all respect each other for whatever we are going to say. What happens in the room stays in the room, and they were not allowed to say any names. Don't mention the staff, don't tell me the hospital's name. Most probably figure out what hospital it is because I've worked in most of them, but please don't give me that kind of information. And then they were a bit more open because they were so scared that another student's going to go tell that person what they said. So I had to put those ground rules. But once the first one spoke, it just
Thank you. And I just also to comment, I think it's so lovely to have an exercise like this because I always remind the students that we are in a talking profession. And so you need to get used to talking medical terminology, talking diagnosis, talking, you know. So I think this is a great way also to just introduce. So thank you.
Any comment?
Just to add on to that, did you experience the students interacting differently depending on their clinical platform?
Oh, yes. Because they would say, this happened to me, and because of this staff member, but if I work with that one, it's not like that. Or the kind of patients that go to a particular place, the experiences are very different. But then someone, for example, if it was a public student from private, would say, but I had a similar example, maybe not exactly like yours, but this is how it happened. So that's why it's similar. And then they will say, this is how I've dealt with it and who I consulted. And this person will then respond. And then it becomes a conversation between them to stay on track with that.
Okay.
But those differences and similarities came in different forms and shapes. And they could see that one scenario can have different perspectives to it. And I think that's why they've rated the questioning their own assumptions and biases in that particular way.
Do you have any questions? I think we got up until 1 o'clock, so maybe one more comment or two more. Oh, this is another session. Oh, okay. I didn't see. Thank you so much. And this is from LNC to say thank you.